Bell Media announced some major job cuts today. The company is axing 1,300 jobs, closing or selling 9 of its radio stations across Canada, shuttering CTV's foreign bureaus in London and Los Angeles, and scaling back operations in Washington. BCE Inc. says around 30% of positions being eliminated are current vacancies that won't be filled. In a memo, Bell says the job cuts are in response to what it describes as unfavorable public policy and regulatory conditions. The company adds its media plan involves moving to a single newsroom approach across brands, allowing for greater collaboration and efficiency. So what do these cuts signal for the future of news overall? To discuss this, let's bring in Winston Sih. He is a journalism lecturer at Toronto Metropolitan University, and he's in Toronto tonight. Thank you for joining us, Winston. This is just the latest round of media layoffs we've seen in recent days. What do you think this says about the future of the news industry as a whole?
Well, these announcements today signal a pretty big change in the Canadian media landscape. As you mentioned, Bell Media is actually one of the largest private broadcasters in the country, and this sheer number of job losses means significant changes at the grassroots level, at the journalist's ability to gather news, but also a heightened pressure to put more news out on more platforms. And so that marks a really big shift there as well. The other thing that's really big as well is almost a political signal. We've been talking about Bill C-18, Bill C-11 as well. That's been actively discussed, and what big tech plays into local media and how that affects legacy media players. And we've seen it with the blocking, the experimentation of blocking of news on websites like Facebook and Google. So the whole question of economic sustainability in newsrooms has been called into questions, and we are seeing with what we saw with Bell Media today, that is a big shift there, and we're seeing big impacts in many of their newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary times in the industry. We're seeing all these digital media companies closing down. Now this big layoff for a traditional media company. As a local news anchor for a couple of decades, I kind of seen how cuts affect local coverage. So how concerned are you about the impact in shrinking local coverage and what it can have on news here in Canada?
Well, it is a big shift. And as you've mentioned, independent media players have been experimenting with different innovative ways to get their local news out there. And some ways have succeeded and other ways haven't. It's difficult for large media companies like the Bell and the Rogers of the world to be able to make those shifts. And one easy way for them to do so and to get instant revenue back is media layoffs. And of course, that makes a big impact on the number of journalists gathering stories. That's really important. And we know that having journalists, those boots on the ground, that's critical to democracy today. And from an education standpoint, that is huge. And many students are very much fearful of what the future looks like. You look at the University of Regina, they have put a pause on admissions into their journalism program, and that's so that they can reevaluate this whole industry and where we're going and how they can be relevant to students today.
As you just mentioned, a few schools have put their journalism programs on pause. You lecture at TMU. I'm actually giving a convocation address there on Friday, talking to these young people as they head out into the working world. So, I mean, what consequences might this have for aspiring journalists and this industry?
Well, it's not all doom and gloom. I think it would be too one-dimensional to say, don't get into the journalism industry.
To hear you say that, Winston.
We know we need journalists in the world, and we need journalists to tell these stories, but the importance is to be more multifaceted, more multi-platform, and to think of innovative ways to tell these stories. So it's really about adapting to new ways of production post-COVID. We know the ways that we gather the news on our phones has changed, and many journalists are expected to do more of that. The other thing, too, is the streaming industry. How do we turn to streaming? One thing that a lot of legacy broadcasters are doing is they're launching streaming channels. CBC is doing it with CBC Explore. It's interesting that Bell Media, they've yet to come out with a streaming news offering.
I think they have Quibi. They tried something with Quibi, but that didn't really work out there.
It didn't quite work out, and so it's a matter of figuring out what that format looks like and how you make that business model profitable. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to private broadcasters, it's about the bottom line. That is literally the million-dollar question.
It really is, Winston, and we appreciate your time tonight and talking about this. And I will see you at TMU, sir, on Friday. We'll talk about this again, I'm sure. That was Winston Sih. He is a journalism lecturer at Toronto Metropolitan University, and he joined us from Toronto tonight. Thank you, Winston.
Thank you.